She had finished her night shift at the hospital, and the corridors still echoed with the muted sounds of monitors and the soft whispers of exhausted patients drifting in and out of uneasy dreams, and she carried her bag close to her chest as she stepped into the cool morning air with the first rays of light stretching over the city, and her body ached from hours of tending wounds, giving medicines, holding hands, and offering words of comfort, but her heart was still awake and restless because she had a habit of walking through the quiet streets before returning to her apartment, as though she needed to shed the weight of the suffering she had just witnessed. She moved slowly along a familiar path lined with small shops, their shutters still down, and stray cats weaving between garbage bins. The smell of bread baking in a corner bakery told her that the day was beginning for someone else, while hers was ending, and she thought of her mother, who used to tell her that healing was not only done with bandages but with presence and kindness. She had seen that truth night after night in the tired eyes of those who feared being forgotten. She reached the crossroad, where she usually turned left toward her small rented place, but as she prepared to step forward, something strange happened. She heard it not with her ears, but deep inside her chest, a single word, clear and firm, like a whisper carried by wind: stay. It startled her because there was no one on the street, no car passing, no colleague calling out, yet it was their unshakable stay. She froze with one foot off the curb, and the silence around her thickened as if the world held its breath. She glanced over her shoulder, confused, wondering if fatigue had finally blurred her senses, but then it came again. Stay. The voice was neither threatening nor comforting. It was simply resolute. She obeyed, though she did not know why. She lowered her foot back to the ground and stood still, clutching her bag, pressing it against her heart. Her breathing quickened because something unseen was steering her choice, and in the next instant the earth beneath her roared with fury. The pavement shuddered, the buildings groaned, windows shattered, and alarms shrieked. The earthquake tore through the street like a beast awakened. Walls crumbled, and heavy stones crashed onto the very spot where she would have been had she taken another step. Her body trembled, not just from the violent shaking, but from the realization that the voice, the command, the impossible instruction had saved her life. Dust filled the air and screams echoed from apartments above as she shielded her head with her arms, but instead of running, she remembered her patients, the frail, the weak, the children and elderly, who would be even more helpless in such chaos. She pushed through falling debris, stumbled into the building across the street, where cries rang out from every floor, and her training returned like second nature. She dragged a man pinned beneath a beam out of a doorway. She calmed a terrified child separated from her mother. She tore fabric from her sleeve to stop the bleeding of a woman whose leg had been cut by shattered glass. Every breath stung her lungs with smoke and dust. Yet her hands did not stop, because something greater than fear carried her forward again and again. She thought of the word stay, and she knew she had been positioned not only for survival, but for service. Time seemed broken, minutes stretched like hours as walls cracked and ceilings split open. She heard the crashing of water pipes flooding the hallway, soaking her shoes, yet she pressed on, guiding strangers down stairwells, guiding them toward patches of sunlight, breaking through broken doors. She found an old man clinging to a railing, his voice shaking with prayers in a language she did not understand, and she held him steady, whispering courage into his ear until rescuers could reach him. She found a young mother clutching her newborn, both covered in dust and trembling, and she wrapped them in her coat, urging them to keep breathing, to keep moving. Her arms felt heavy as stone, yet they moved with purpose, carrying life forward when her own strength should have failed. She found herself in the stairwell during an aftershock, the walls vibrating, the lights flickering, and she thought of her father, who once told her that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to abandon love in its presence. So she pressed her hand against the wall, steadying both herself and those behind her, and she led them step by step into the open, where the street was now covered with rubble and broken glass. Rescue teams arrived with stretchers, megaphones, flashlights, their voices rising over chaos, yet she stayed to point them toward those still trapped inside. She described where she had last heard voices, where she had seen movement. She refused to leave until every cry had been answered only when the building was cleared. Did she finally collapse onto the sidewalk, her face streaked with sweat, tears, and grime? And she looked at the sky, now pale blue, with morning fully born, and she whispered a prayer of thanks, not for her own safety alone, but for the guidance that had directed her steps when logic could not. Days later, she returned to the hospital, though her body still bore scratches and bruises. She treated new patients who had been pulled from the wreckage, and many recognized her, their eyes filling with gratitude and disbelief that she had been there beside them. In the darkest moments she listened, humbly, not seeking recognition, but giving thanks that she had not ignored that small voice. Her story traveled quietly through the community, whispered in waiting rooms, repeated by survivors, retold by children who said the nurse who stayed saved us. She never doubted again that God had spoken into her moment of exhaustion and hesitation, and she carried that memory into every shift, every patient, every sleepless night for the rest of her career. She told the story not to glorify herself, but to remind others that sometimes the quietest voice can be the strongest shield. Sometimes what seems like delay is actually deliverance, and sometimes staying still is the only way to be exactly where you are needed. Years passed, yet she still walked that same street, rebuilt shops, new paint covering old scars, and each time she paused at that corner, she felt again the pulse of that single word, stay, and she smiled, knowing that obedience had written a story that could never be erased. And now you who are listening may carry burdens, may face moments when the ground of your life shakes without warning, and the path ahead seems certain until it collapses beneath unseen weight. Remember her story, remember the whisper that saved her life and gave her strength to save others. And if you have ever heard that still small voice urging you to wait, to hold, to trust, share it with us, because your testimony may be the word that anchors another soul in their own trembling hour. Thank you for joining Faith Light Stories, where we bring light into the darkest moments. And if this story touched you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe so that together we can spread faith across the world, one true story at a time.